The town of Fairbrook was the kind of place where the most dramatic news of the week might be the high school's football score or a new pie recipe winning the county fair. Nestled in the rolling plains of the Midwest, it had one main street, a diner with a neon sign that flickered in the wind, and a population that could fit into a single high school auditorium. In winter, Fairbrook became postcard perfect. Pine trees dusted with snow, ice crystals catching the light in the morning. Sun. But that winter was cruel. The cold had a way of creeping into bones and settling there, a relentless, quiet enemy. It was on one of those bitter mornings that Mrs. Dorothea Marks made the discovery. Dorothea, 72 years old and famously punctual about her morning walk, had set out just after sunrise. She wore her long wool coat, the same one she'd had since her husband was alive, and a knitted scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. She carried her walking stick, though she hardly needed it, and trudged carefully down Maple Lane, where the frost made the sidewalk slick. Halfway down the block, she noticed something unusual. At first, she thought it was a statue, a small dog, motionless on a patch of snow by a chain-link fence. She slowed, puzzled. In this weather, no dog would linger outside without moving. "Hello there," she called softly, her voice muffled by the scarf. The animal did not respond. It didn't tilt its head or wag its tail. It just stood there, legs stiff, head slightly lowered, its fur clumped with frost. Dorothea stepped closer, heart quickening. She could see the dog's eyes now, wide, dark, and unblinking. Not the bright, curious eyes of a pet, but the hollow, distant gaze of something beyond fear. She crouched down, her knees aching, and extended her gloved hand. "It's okay, sweet thing," she murmured. The dog's breath came out in slow clouds, so faint she worried it might stop altogether. She reached for the chain around its neck, tugging gently. It was frozen stiff, embedded in the ice. The sight made her stomach twist. Whoever had left the animal here had done so deliberately, and for long enough that frost had built along the links. Dorothea pulled out her phone, an old flip model she barely knew how to use, and called the non-emergency police line. Her voice trembled as she explained what she'd found. "Stay where you are, Mom," the dispatcher said. "We're sending animal control right now." While she waited, Dorothea stood by the dog, shielding it from the wind with her coat as best she could. She found herself talking to it quietly, as though words alone could keep it alive. "You're going to be all right now. Help's coming." By the time Officer Jake Harper arrived, the sun had risen a little higher, but the air was no warmer. Harper, a sturdy man in his early 40s, with a thick beard and a gentle manner, knelt beside the dog immediately. "Poor thing," he said, touching the chain with a gloved finger. "Been out here a long while." He radioed animal control, urging them to hurry, then tried to coax the dog into movement. It didn't flinch or growl. It simply remained still, as if frozen from the inside out. Within minutes, a white van pulled up, its logo reading Fairbrook Animal Welfare Services. Two officers emerged, one carrying a thick thermal blanket. They worked carefully, easing the chain free from the ice and wrapping the shivering animal in warmth. The dog made a faint whimper, then went silent again. As they loaded it into the van, Dorothea caught one of the officer's eyes. "Who could do this?" she asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. The officer gave a tight shake of his head. "We'll find out." At the shelter, veterinarians examined the dog. He was a medium-sized mutt, maybe 4 or 5 years old, with fur that might once have been golden, but was now dulled and patchy. His paws were raw from the ice. The vets determined he had been outside for at least 6 hours in temperatures well below freezing. Hypothermia had set in, but with rest, warmth, and food, he might recover. Back on Maple Lane, Officer Harper remained at the scene. The chain was still there, now coiled in a heap beside the fence. The house it was attached to was unremarkable. A small, single-story building with peeling paint and curtains drawn tight. Harper knocked on the door. No answer. He made a note to return later with a warrant out by noon. Word had spread. Fairbrook was small, and news moved quickly. At the diner, locals speculated over coffee and pancakes. Some swore they knew whose house. The dog had been chained outside. Others debated what kind of person could be cruel enough to leave an animal in the cold. The story reached the town's Facebook group before the end of the day. Someone posted a photo Dorothea had taken. The heat, dog standing in the snow, eyes distant, the chain taut at its neck. The image stirred something in people. Comments flooded in. Anger, heartbreak, offers to adopt the dog, demands for justice. For Lily Carter, the girl across the street, the image was unnecessary. She had seen it happen. From her second-story bedroom window, she had watched the night. Before, as her neighbor, Frank Ellison, brought the dog outside. She saw him loop the chain through the fence post, pat the dog once on the head, and walk back into his warm house. The light from his kitchen spilled out for a moment before the door shut, leaving the yard in darkness. She'd wanted to run. Outside, to do something, but her mother had already gone to bed, and Lily had been too afraid to wake her. Now, seeing Dorothea's post, Lily felt a weight in her chest. She knew she was the only person who had actually witnessed the truth. But she also knew Frank scared her. That night, as Fairbrook's street lamps flickered to life and the wind carried snow across the empty roads, the dog lay in a heated kennel at the shelter, wrapped in blankets. His breathing was steady now, but his eyes still held that far-off look. Across town, in her yellow-painted bedroom, Lily sat cross-legged on her bed, staring at the darkened window across the street. She thought about the dog, about Frank, and about the way the world could feel so small in a place like Fairbrook, and yet so dangerous. The town had no idea, yet how big this small story would become. The call came into Fairbrook Animal Welfare. Services at 7:42 a.m. The dispatcher's voice was brisk but concerned. Elderly female reports a dog frozen in place. Possible neglect. Location, Maple Lane. Respond immediately. The van's tires crunched over the ice as officers Karen Meals and David Roca pulled up. Both had seen their share of neglect cases, but something about the way the dispatcher had paused before giving details put them on edge. Officer Harper waved them over from the corner of the property. His breath fogged in the air, his gloved hands stuffed into his jacket pockets. Over here, he said, nodding toward the patch of snow near the fence. Karen saw it immediately. The small, unmoving form of a dog, half wrapped in frost, his fur stiff where ice had formed overnight. The animal didn't try to run or bark. It simply stood, legs locked, as if rooted to the earth. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, crouching down. She reached out slowly, the way you would with a dog that might bolt, except this one didn't even flinch. When she touched his shoulder, his fur was cold under the frost. His eyes flickered toward her once, then away, like he didn't want to trust what he was seeing. David knelt beside her, examining the chain. It had frozen solid to the metal post and was stiff with ice. The links were embedded into a layer of frozen ground so deeply that pulling it free would risk hurting the dog's neck. "I'll cut it," David said, reaching into the van for bolt cutters. The first snap of metal echoed in the cold air. A second snap freed the chain entirely. Karen slid the thermal blanket from her shoulder and wrapped it around the dog, tucking it tight under his chest. "That's it. You're safe now," she whispered. The dog's body was tense, but he made no sound other than a faint, shaky breath. Dorothea Marks stood off to the side, clutching her walking stick like it was part of her spine. Her face was pinched with anger. "I found him just standing there. Hours, I think." "Who would do that?" "We'll figure it out," Harper reassured her. But there was a heaviness in his voice. These cases rarely ended with a simple answer. The dog was carried gently to the van, where the back compartment was lined with heating pads. As Karen closed the door, she glanced toward the small house beyond the fence. Curtains still drawn. No movement. She made a mental note to run the address through their records when they got back to the shelter. The drive to Fairbrook Animal Shelter took less than 10 minutes, but the van's heater roared the whole way. Karen sat in the back with the dog, stroking his head slowly. His skin twitched under her touch, a reflex from the cold. Every so often, his eyes would drift closed, not in sleep, but in exhaustion. Inside the shelter, the air was warm and smelled faintly of cedar chips and disinfectant. A veterinary technician named Sam came running. "Hypothermia?" he asked, already leading them toward the exam room. Karen nodded. "Exposure's bad. Paws look raw. No visible injuries other than frostbite." The exam began immediately. They checked his temperature, dangerously low. Sam rubbed his paws with a special warming gel, while another tech hooked up a fluid line to combat dehydration. A heating lamp was angled over him, bathing his body in red-orange light. Gradually, his shivering started, which the vets knew was actually a good sign. His body was fighting to warm itself again. While the medical team worked, Karen stepped into the shelter's small office to write her preliminary report. She listed the time, weather conditions, and the discovery location. Then she opened a separate form. Animal Neglect Investigation. The address Dorothea had pointed to came up quickly in the database. Owner, Frank Ellison. Previous complaints. 1. Noise disturbance involving marking. 2 unsubstantiated neglect calls. Nothing had ever stuck. Karen frowned. She'd heard his name before, not in a criminal sense, but in the way small-town gossip works. A loner, quick-tempered, rarely seen at town events. Now she had the unpleasant suspicion that this wasn't the first time an animal in his care had suffered. Back in the exam room, Sam gave his update. He's stable for now. We'll monitor him closely for the next 48 hours. Frostbite's mild. Looks like we caught him just in time. Appetite's low, but that's normal after this kind of shock. Karen crouched beside the dog's crate. You've got some fight in you, huh? She murmured. The dog didn't look at her, but his breathing had steadied. She wondered how many hours he'd stood there in the dark, wind cutting across his body, waiting for someone, anyone, to help. Meanwhile, Officer Harper drove back to Maple Lane. If Frank Ellison was home, Harper intended to have a word. But when he knocked, there was no answer. No movement inside. Just the sound of wind rattling the metal siding. He left a card tucked into the doorframe and returned to his cruiser, watching the house in his rearview mirror. Something about the stillness of the place didn't sit right. By evening, the dog had become a quiet topic of conversation all over town. At the diner, people clustered in booths, phones in hand, scrolling through the Facebook post Dorothea had made. The photo, the dog frozen in place, chain taut, was drawing comments by the minute. That's criminal, one post read. I'll adopt him right now, said another. A few hinted at knowing exactly whose yard that was. But in Fairbrook, accusations spread faster than facts, and Harper knew. They needed hard evidence before anything reached the courthouse. In the yellow 2-story house across from Frank Ellison's, Lily Carter sat at the dinner table with her mom, pushing peas around her plate. The image on Dorothea's post burned in her mind, though she didn't need it to remember. She had seen everything from her bedroom window, the way Frank had stepped outside the night before, how he'd chained the dog without looking back, how the wind had whipped snow across the yard. She had wanted to do something, but the fear had kept her still. Now she wondered if fear had made her just as guilty. Her mother glanced up. "You're awfully quiet tonight," Lily swallowed. "Just thinking about the dog." Her mother nodded, but didn't press. In Fairbrook, silence often felt safer than speaking. At the shelter, the dog slept under the red glow of the heating lamp, his breath slow and even. The staff had decided to call him Chance, though no one knew yet how fitting that name would become. Somewhere in town, the person responsible for leaving him in the cold was probably settling in for the night, heater humming, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, that their actions had set something in motion. Something bigger than one dog, bigger than one man. A story that would soon spill from a quiet street into a packed courtroom, and into the hearts of everyone who heard it. The next morning, a pale winter sun stretched weak light across Fairbrook. The snow on Maple Lane glittered in the early hours, but beneath that beauty lay a chill. It wasn't just in the air. It was in the mood of the town. At the Fairbrook Animal Shelter, Corinne Mills sat at her desk with a steaming mug of coffee, reviewing the neglect form she'd started the day before. The name Frank Ellison stared back at her from the report header. She'd already run his name through the system, and while there were no convictions, his record had a pattern. Complaints about his animals, sudden disappearances of pets he claimed to have rehomed, and a reputation among neighbors for having a short fuse. Still, suspicion wasn't proof. And without proof, the case would go nowhere. She picked up the phone and dialed Officer Harper. "Morning," Harper said on the second ring. "Morning. I'm digging into Ellison. Nothing solid yet, but I don't like the history." "I stopped by his place again this morning," Harper replied. "Curtains still drawn. No sign of him. Trucks in the driveway, though. I think he's avoiding me." "Or avoiding the law," Corinne said. "Either way, we need someone who saw what happened," Harper said, his tone heavy. "Chain, frozen dog, sub-zero tongue. It's damning, but not enough if he says the dog wandered off." Corinne tapped her pen against the desk. "We both know dogs don't wander off and rechain themselves." "True," Harper said. "But the jury needs more than logic. They need a witness." Across town, the diner's morning rush hummed with conversation. The talk was almost entirely about the dog. Some claimed they'd seen Ellison leave his house late at night. Others insisted he'd been in trouble for cruelty before. Sitting in a corner booth, Dorothea sipped her tea and listened, her jaw tight. She wasn't one for gossip, but she'd known cruelty when she saw it. Still, she didn't have the one thing Harper needed: direct sight of the moment Ellison left the dog outside. That evidence belonged to someone else entirely. In the yellow house across the street from Frank's, Lily Carter sat on her bed with her knees drawn up. She hadn't slept well. The scene replayed in her head, the porch light flicking on, Frank stepping out in his heavy coat, the chain clinking in his hand. The dog had followed reluctantly, as though already sensing what was about to happen. Then the chain had looped around the post, and Frank had gone inside without a glance back. She'd watched until her toes were numb from the draft coming through her window. She'd thought about waking her mother, but her mother worked 2 jobs and was already asleep. And Lily knew her mom didn't like trouble, especially trouble involving neighbors who could make life difficult. But now, trouble had come anyway. The knock on the door came just before lunch. Lily's mom, Carol, answered, and there stood Officer Harper, his hat in his hand. "Afternoon," Harper said, polite but direct. "I'm here about the incident with the dog on Maple Lane." Carol hesitated. "We saw the post online." "I understand," Harper said, "but I'm not here to talk about Facebook. I'm here because I believe someone in this house might have seen what happened. If that's true, their testimony could help us protect that animal and prevent this from happening again." Carol frowned. You think Frank did it? I think we need to hear from anyone who might have witnessed the dog being chained up. In the cold, Lily appeared in the hallway, her small frame half hidden behind the doorway. Harper caught her eye, and for a moment she didn't look away. Later, at the kitchen table, Lily told the truth. At first, her voice was quiet, hesitant, the kind of voice that tests the air before committing to a sound. But as she described the way the dog had stood in the snow, the wind whipping its fur, her voice grew steadier. "And you're sure it was Mr. Ellison who brought the dog out?" Harper asked. "Yes," Lily said. "It was him. I saw his face when the porch light came on. He didn't even look back." Carol's hands tightened around her coffee mug, the ceramic creaking faintly. "If she tells this in court, will her name be public?" "I'll do everything I can to protect her," Harper said. "But yes, she would have to testify. It's the strongest evidence we could have." Lily glanced at her mother. She thought of Chance, the dog's hunched shoulders, the frost on his muzzle, and then she thought of Frank's closed door. "I'll do it," she said. That afternoon, Harper and Corinne filed the official accusation. Defendant, Frank Ellison. Charge, animal cruelty, neglect resulting in risk to life. When Harper knocked again on Ellison's door, this time with papers in hand, the man finally answered. He was in his late 40s, hair thinning, a day's stubble shadowing his jaw. His eyes narrowed the moment he saw the badge. "What's this?" Frank said, voice low and flat. "Formal notice of investigation." Harper said, "We'll need you to come down to the station for a statement." "I didn't do anything," Frank said, but his gaze darted briefly toward the empty yard, as if checking whether the chain was still there. "You'll have your chance to say that under oath." Harper replied. By evening, the charge had made the rounds of the town's gossip mill. Some were relieved, others were skeptical. But at the shelter, no one doubted the importance of what had happened. Chance was already walking a little more, eating small portions. His eyes were still wary, but when Lily visited with Harper later, that week he sniffed her hand and didn't turn away. "You're going to be okay," Lily whispered through the bars. It wasn't a promise she knew she could keep, but it felt right to say it anyway. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between Fairbrook's houses, the lines were being drawn. On one side, the truth of what Lily had seen. On the other, Frank Ellison's denial. It would all come to a head soon, not on Maple Lane, but in a courtroom where the stakes were higher than they'd ever been for a 12-year-old girl. The accusation was only the beginning. The real fight was still ahead. Lily Carter had never been inside a courtroom. She'd seen them on TV, polished lawyers in sharp suits, witnesses speaking confidently from the stand, but those images felt as distant from her own life as the moon. She was a small-town kid who liked drawing in the margins of her math homework and walking dogs for neighbors in the summer. The idea of standing in front of strangers, accusing a grown man of something awful, was a weight she could feel in her chest. But every time she thought about saying nothing, she saw the dog again, still, silent, frost clinging to his fur dot. It began with a meeting at the Fairbrook Police Department. The building was small, 2 floors, one main entrance, and smelled faintly of old coffee and floor cleaner. Harper met them in the lobby, his badge catching the fluorescent light. "Lily," he said with a small smile, "this is going to be a conversation, not an interrogation. I just want you to tell me what you told your mom, but we'll write it down so the court can use it." Carol, sitting beside her daughter, placed a hand over Lily's. "We're here the whole time." They followed Harper into a small conference room. On the table was a voice recorder, a stack of legal pads, and a pitcher of water. Corinne Mills was there too, leaning against the wall, her arms folded. The questions started simple. "What time did you first notice the dog?" "What could you see from your window?" Did you recognize the man who brought him outside? Lily answered slowly, choosing each word carefully. Her voice was soft, but steady enough that Harper stopped leaning forward after a while. When? She described the moment Frank looped the chain around the post and walked inside. The room went very quiet. And you're sure it was Mr. Ellison? Harper asked. Yes, Lily said, and this time she didn't look away. Corinne nodded. You did the right thing by telling us. After the statement was recorded, Harper explained what would happen next. The prosecutor may call you to testify. That means you'd come into the courtroom, sit in the witness chair, and tell the judge and jury exactly what you told us today. Lily's throat tightened. What if he's there, watching me? He will be, Harper said, honest but gentle. But you won't be alone. Your mom will be in the room. The prosecutor will be asking you questions, and the judge will make sure you're treated respectfully. It's important to remember, you're not the one on trial. He is. The prosecutor assigned to the case was Dana Whitmore, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a calm, deliberate way of speaking. She came to the Carter home that Saturday with a leather briefcase and a binder of case files. They sat at the kitchen table while Donna flipped open the binder. Inside was everything: the shelter's veterinary report, photographs of the frozen chain, Dorothea's statement, and now Lily's recorded interview. Lily, Dana said, your testimony will be our strongest evidence. The jury will need to hear from someone who saw Mr. Ellison leave that dog outside in the freezing cold. Without you, this case might not hold. Carol looked uneasy. She's only 12. Is there any way to, I don't know, shield her from him? Dana's expression softened. I'll ask the judge if we can arrange for her to testify with certain protections, like avoiding direct eye contact, or letting her sit in a less formal space, but I can't promise it. What I can promise is that I'll prepare her for everything. Preparation became part of Lily's afternoons. Dana would visit with a legal pad and role-play the courtroom setting. She would ask Lily to recount the night in detail, pausing, to explain when the defense might try to trip her up. They might ask the same question in different ways. Dana explained one day, it's not to trick you, it's to see if your story changes. The best thing you can do is tell the truth, exactly as you remember it, every time. They might say I made it up, Lily said. They might, Dana admitted, but they can't make the truth disappear. You just have to hold your ground. At night, Lily sometimes lay awake imagining the courtroom. She pictured Frank's face, the way he'd glanced over his shoulder that night, as if making sure no one saw him. She wondered if he would try to glare at her during the trial. She told herself she wouldn't look at him. When the nerves got too heavy, she thought of Chance, the way he'd sniffed her hand at the shelter, his eyes cautious but less empty than before. That helped. Meanwhile, the town's curiosity was only growing. People in the diner whispered when Frank came in for coffee, some turning their backs on him. A few thought the case was overblown. But for every skeptic, there was someone ready to stand outside the courthouse with a Justice for Chance sign. Lily avoided those conversations. She didn't want to be the center of gossip. But she noticed people looking at her differently, now not unkindly, but with a certain knowing, as if they'd already decided she was brave, even if she didn't feel that way yet. 2 weeks before the trial, Donna brought Lily and Carol to the courthouse for a walkthrough. The courtroom felt bigger than Lily expected. Rows of wooden benches faced the judge's high bench. The witness stand was just a small seat with a microphone in front of it, but it might as well have been a spotlight on a stage. Dana guided her through where she'd sit, how the oath would be taken, where the jury would be. The important thing, she said, is to look at me when you answer. Pretend it's just the two of us talking, like in your kitchen. Lily nodded, but her palms were damp. On the way home, Carol asked if she still wanted to go through with it. Lily stared out the window at the snowbanks lining the road. The sky was a pale gray, heavy with more snow. She thought about all the adults in Fairbrook, police, lawyers, neighbors, and how none of them had been the one to see what she saw. "If I don't tell the truth," she said quietly, "who will?" Carol didn't answer right away, but she reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. It was all the answer Lily needed. By the time the trial date arrived, the quiet 12-year-old from the yellow house was no longer just Lily Carter. In the eyes of Fairbrook, she was the girl who saw. And in the eyes of the court, she was about to become the witness who could decide whether justice was served or whether Frank Ellison would walk away without consequence. The stage was set. All that remained was to speak. The courthouse in Fairbrook was a century-old brick building with tall, arched windows and creaking oak floors. On the morning of the trial, the steps outside were dusted with fresh snow, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke from nearby chimneys. Inside, the mood was different, thicker, heavier. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but charged, like the pause before a storm. Lily and her mother arrived early, slipping into a bench near the front. The courtroom was already filling with people. Animal welfare volunteers in winter coats took seats alongside reporters, their notepads ready. A few townsfolk who had never met Lily were there too, their curiosity drawing them like moths to a flame dot. At the defense table sat Frank Ellison, wearing a gray suit that looked borrowed. His eyes were hooded, his expression unreadable. He didn't look at Lily. Not yet. Donna Whitmore arrived minutes later, her briefcase in hand. She bent down beside Lily. "Remember what we practiced. You don't have to rush. You're here to tell the truth, nothing more, nothing less." Lily nodded, though her stomach felt like it was full of cold water. The trial began with the formalities. The judge, a tall man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, called the court to order. The jury filed in, 12 strangers who now held the weight of the case in their hands. Dana began her opening statement, her voice steady and clear. She spoke of the bitter cold that night, of the chain frozen into the ground, of the dog's near-fatal exposure. She described the evidence, the veterinary reports, the photographs, the witness testimony they would hear. "Ladies and gentlemen," Donna said, looking each juror in the eye, "this is not a complicated case. It's a simple matter of responsibility, and the failure of that responsibility. The defendant left his dog outside in deadly temperatures for hours, and if not for the intervention of others, that dog would be dead." The defense attorney, a man named Richard Platt, countered with a different picture. His tone was smooth, almost casual, as he suggested that the dog had wandered away from Ellison's yard during the night, that it had been found coincidentally near his home. He hinted that witnesses could be mistaken, especially well-meaning but inexperienced ones. Lily knew what that meant. She could almost feel the attorney's words brushing against her like a cold draft. Inexperienced, unreliable. A child's account. The first witnesses were called. Dorothea Marks took the stand, recounting her morning walk and the moment she found the dog. Her voice carried the kind of authority that came from decades of speaking her mind. The jury listened intently as she described the frost clinging to the dog's fur, the stiffness in its stance. Next came Officer Harper, who testified about arriving at the scene, the frozen chain, and the subsequent investigation. He was careful, precise, laying out the facts without embellishment. Then came Karen Mills, who told of cutting the chain and transporting the dog to the shelter. She spoke of its dangerously low body temperature, its slow, shallow breaths. By the time Gaina called Lily to the stand, the sun had shifted, casting pale light through the courtroom windows. Lily's name was announced, and the bailiff gestured her forward. She rose from the bench, her knees a little shaky, and walked past the jury box. She could feel their eyes on her, a mix of curiosity and expectation. She didn't look at Frank. As she passed the defense table, though she was aware of him still and quiet, his gaze following her. The bailiff guided her to the witness stand. She sat, her feet dangling just above the floor, and placed her hands in her lap. "Do you swear? To tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" the clerk asked. "I do," she said, her voice small but steady. Dana approached first. "Lily, can you tell the court where you live?" she answered. Then came the next question. "On the night of January 12th, did you see the defendant, Mr. Frank Ellison?" "Yes," she said, glancing toward Dana, and then quickly back down. "And where was he?" "In his yard, with his dog." Dana let a moment of silence pass, giving Lily space. "Can you describe what happened?" Lily took a breath. She pictured her bedroom window, the cold air seeping through the glass, the light spilling from Frank's porch. He brought the dog outside on a chain. He walked it to the fence post, looped the chain around, and then he went back inside. The wind was blowing hard, and the snow was falling. "What did the dog do?" "It just stood there," Lily sighed. "It didn't bark or move. It looked scared." Dana asked a few more questions, each one careful and clear. Lily answered them all. She was aware of the defense attorney watching her, waiting for his turn. When it came, his voice was smooth, almost friendly. "Lily, you said you were watching from your bedroom window?" "Yes." "How far away is that from Mr. Ellison's fence?" She thought about it. "Maybe 30 feet? And it was nighttime?" "Yes." "Snow falling?" "Yes." "So visibility wasn't perfect, was it?" Lily kept her eyes on him. "I could see his face when the porch light was on." He paused just for a fraction of a second before moving on. "And you're certain it was him? Could it have been someone else?" "No," Lily said. "It was him." The defense attorney tried once or twice more to chip at her certainty, but Lily didn't waver. She answered each question without changing her story. Her heart was pounding, but she could feel something shift in the room, a subtle change in how the jury was watching her. They weren't seeing a child anymore. They were seeing someone telling the truth. When Dana returned for a brief follow-up, she kept it simple. "Lily, is there any doubt in your mind about what you saw?" "No," Lily said. "Thank you," Dana said. And that was it. As Lily stepped down from the witness stand, she finally let her eyes flick toward Frank. He was staring at her, his expression flat. But there was something else in his gaze, now something unreadable. She didn't hold it for long. She returned to her seat beside her mother, who squeezed her hand tightly. The courtroom felt different after that. The air seemed heavier, the silence sharper. The jury was no longer leaning back in their seats. They were forward, listening as the final witnesses were called. It would be days before the verdict came. But the moment Lily spoke, the course of the trial shifted, and everyone in the room knew it. The courthouse doors had a way of swallowing noise. Outside, the wind pushed snow across the steps. Car tires hissed along the slush, and muffled conversations floated up from the sidewalk. But inside the courtroom, every sound carried Lily's testimony had ended, but the echo of her words seemed to linger in the high, wood-paneled walls. The jury was still watching her as she returned to the bench beside her mother, Carol. Dana Whitmore was already stacking her papers, but her movements were slower now, deliberate, as if she wanted the jury to have time to sit with what they'd just heard. Frank Ellison didn't move. He sat at the defense table with his lawyer, Richard Platt, staring at the surface of the table as though something written there might save him. The judge called for a 15-minute recess. The room shifted instantly. Jurors filed toward their private deliberation space. Reporters bent their heads together, pens scratching. A few people in the public benches whispered in low tones. Though the bailiff's sharp glance cut most of those murmurs short, Carral leaned toward her daughter. "You did so well," she whispered, her hand still clasped over Lily's. So well." Lily managed a small nod, but she didn't feel well, so much as drained, like she'd stepped out of herself for those 10 minutes on the stand. And only now was she back in her own body. During the recess, Dana joined them. "You held beautifully," she told Lily. "He tried to push you into uncertainty, and you didn't let him." Lily's brow furrowed. "Is it over now? For you, mostly?" Dana said. "But I think the defense is going to try something next." Carol straightened. "What kind of something?" Dana hesitated just long enough for both of them to notice. Sometimes, when the defense knows the facts aren't on their side, they turn to character work, trying to make the jury doubt the people more than the evidence. Lily glanced toward Frank's table. Platt was speaking to his client in low, tight sentences, his hand moving in small, sharp gestures. Frank's face was still unreadable, but his eyes kept darting toward the jury box, as if calculating. When court reconvened, the defense called no further witnesses for the factual timeline. Instead, Platt rose and began what was clearly a pivot, asking the judge if the court might allow a few clarifying statements regarding my client's relationship with the animal in question. The judge agreed, with the warning, "Keep it relevant, Mr. Platt." Platt's voice softened as he spoke to the jury. He painted Frank Ellison as a man down on his luck, someone who'd lost work in the last year, whose heating bills had doubled, who perhaps made a poor decision that night, but not out of cruelty. He spoke of Frank's childhood, growing up with dogs, working on farms, always surrounded by animals and caring for them. Dana rose for an objection twice, once when Platt drifted into speculation, and once when he tried to slip in hearsay about what neighbors thought of Frank. The judge sustained both objections, but the attempt had been made to make the man seem human, sympathetic. Then Platt went for something riskier. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "you've heard from a 12-year-old girl who believes she saw my client outside with the dog. I'm not here to disparage her. She is brave to testify, but we must remember she is 12. We must remember that snow, distance, and darkness can blur what the eyes see. And we must ask ourselves, is it possible, just possible, that she was mistaken?" He let the question hang in the air. Not pressing, not accusing, just planting. Lily felt her stomach twist. Her grip on Carol's hand tightened. Dana's jaw set. She rose the moment Platt sat down. "Your Honor," she said, "the prosecution would like to recall Lily Carter for one final question." A ripple went through the room, quiet enough to keep order, but audible enough for Lily to feel it. She glanced at her mom, who nodded once, and then she stood. This time, as Lily returned to the stand, the silence in the room was heavier. The jury was leaning forward. Even the reporters had stopped writing. Frank's eyes followed her, unblinking. Dana approached with no papers in her hands. She stood a few feet from the witness stand and spoke in a tone that was gentle but unshakably clear. She said, "You've just heard Mr. Platt suggest that maybe, just maybe, you were mistaken about what you saw that night." "I have. Only one question for you." Lily waited. "Do you have any doubt?" Dana asked. "About the identity of the man you saw with that dog?" There it was. The heart of everything. Lily's voice didn't waver. No, it was Frank Ellison. No qualifiers. No hesitation. And just like that it happened. The courtroom went completely, utterly still. No shuffling of papers. No coughs. Not even the creak of a wooden bench. The kind of silence that presses on your ears until you can hear your own breath. Every face, judge, jury, attorneys, audience, was turned toward the small figure in the witness stand, who had just erased any shadow of uncertainty. For a beat, Even Frank Ellison didn't move. Dana gave a single nod. No further questions. The judge dismissed Lily from the stand, and the spell began to break. Reporters' pens scratched again. The jury shifted in their seats, but the weight of that moment remained. It was as if the whole room had understood, in unison, that the case had tipped. When Lily rejoined her mother, Carol leaned in close. "You just changed everything," she whispered. The rest of the day's proceedings moved faster. With no more witnesses, the court recessed for the evening, the judge instructing the jury to return for closing arguments the next morning. But as people filed out into the cold night air, that silence, the one that had gripped the room, was still the thing everyone remembered. In small-town Fairbrook, moments like that didn't come often. And when they did, they stuck. Snow was still falling the next morning when Lily and her mother returned to the courthouse. The air had that kind of brittle cold where every breath felt like it scraped the inside of your nose. Fairbrook's streets were quieter than usual. School buses ran late, and only a few bundled pedestrians hurried along the sidewalks. Inside the courthouse, though, the energy was anything but quiet. The jury was already gathering in their room. Reporters sat with steaming coffee cups balanced on their knees. A couple of townsfolk, who had followed every minute of the trial, were back in their usual seats, prepared to see it through to the end. Frank Ellison sat at the defense table in the same gray suit, his hands clasped in front of him. He'd shaved that morning, and the sharpness of his jawline made his expression look even harder. He avoided looking at Lily entirely. The judge entered promptly at 9 and wasted no time. "We will proceed with closing arguments," he said, his voice steady as the snow piling against the windows. "Prosecution may begin." Donna Whitmore rose and stepped into the open space between the two tables. She didn't pace. She didn't gesture wildly. She simply stood, facing the jury, and began. "You have heard the testimony. You have seen the photographs. You have read the veterinary report. This case is not about misunderstanding or chance or mistake. This case is about a man who left his dog outside, chained, in temperatures that can kill in less than an hour." Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. She reminded the jury of Dorothea Marks's eyewitness account of Officer Harper's clear statements about the frozen chain, and of Karen Mills's description of the dog's dangerously low body temperature. Then she spoke of Lily not as a child witness, but as someone who had seen the truth and had the courage to speak it, even under pressure. "Mr. Platt wants you to think she could have been wrong." At darkness and distance somehow clouded her vision. But ladies and gentlemen, truth doesn't bend to the weather. She knew what she saw. Donna stepped back toward her table. This is about responsibility. And when someone shirks that responsibility, it's the most vulnerable who suffer. Today, you decide whether that is acceptable in our community. When she sat down, Platt was already on his feet. He gave the jury a tight smile before beginning. "My learned colleague is passionate," he said, "but passion does not equal proof beyond a reasonable doubt." He circled slowly, hands clasped behind his back. He painted Frank Ellison again as a man caught in a moment of bad judgment, not cruelty. He emphasized the cold, the snow, the fact that not one photograph exists of my client with the dog that night. He returned to Lily's testimony, his voice softening almost to the point of pity. 12 years old, bright, brave. But memory is a fragile thing, especially when the conditions are poor. Platt leaned slightly toward the jury box. "I ask you to remember that doubt, reasonable doubt, must mean something. If there's any chance she could be mistaken, then you must find my client not guilty." The judge gave final instructions, and then the jury filed out. The heavy wooden door to the deliberation room closed behind them with a muted click. And just like that, the waiting began. Lily had never realized how slowly time could move. She sat with her mother, Dana, beside them, while the courtroom emptied of everyone but a few lingering reporters and court staff. Frank remained at his table, staring at a spot on the floor, his lawyer speaking to him in a low voice. Every so often, the bailiff would appear from the hallway, but each time it was just to check on something or pass along a note to the judge. Hours stretched. By noon, the jury had not returned. The judge ordered a lunch break, but Lily barely touched the sandwich her mother handed her in the small cafeteria. Every sound felt distant: the hum of the vending machine, a clatter of a dropped fork. Her mind was fixed on the deliberation room upstairs. What if they don't believe me? She asked quietly. They will, Carol said, but her tone was more a hope than a certainty. Donna set down her coffee. Juries take time because they want to get it right. That's a good thing, Lily. The snow was thicker when they returned to the courtroom after lunch. The light outside had gone from pale gray to the deeper blue of late afternoon. Still, the jury stayed behind that closed door. Lily found herself watching Frank. He hadn't fidgeted much all day, no tapping, no shifting, but there was something in his eyes now, a kind of restless calculation, like he was turning over every possible outcome. Once their gazes almost met, but Lily looked away first. It was nearly 5 o'clock when the bailiff finally stepped through the side door. We have a verdict. The words seemed to slice through the air. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. People who had been slouched in their seats straightened instantly. Donna gathered her papers, though she wouldn't need them anymore. Carol reached for Lily's hand. The jury filed back into the box, their faces unreadable. The foreperson, a woman with neat hair, and a pale scarf, clutched a folded slip of paper. The judge asked, "Have you reached a unanimous verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." The foreperson passed the paper to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. He read it once, then returned it to the bailiff to be read aloud. Lily's heartbeat felt so loud in her ears that she almost didn't hear the bailiff's voice. In the case of the state of Minnesota versus Frank Ellison on the charge of animal cruelty, the bailiff paused to glance at the slip again. "We, the jury, find the defendant?" The entire room seemed to lean forward, breath suspended in the moment before the word dropped. That was where the weight of the whole trial hung on the next syllable. The air inside the courtroom felt so tight it could have snapped. Even the building itself seemed to wait, the groan of the old wooden beams silenced, the winter wind outside muted under the pull of the moment. The bailiff's voice broke the stillness. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty." It wasn't a shout, not a gasp, just a collective exhale, like a room full of people had been holding their breath for hours. The sound swept over the benches, and Lily felt it in her chest. Frank Ellison didn't move at first. He just sat there, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the grain of the defense table. His lawyer leaned toward him, murmuring something, but Frank's expression didn't change. Only after a few seconds did his jaw flex tight enough that a vein stood out along his temple. Across the aisle, Donna allowed herself a single nod before turning to place a hand on Lily's shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. Carol's grip on her daughter's hand tightened. "It's over," she said, though her voice trembled like she wasn't sure if it really was. The judge thanked the jury for their service, his tone formal but not unkind. "This court appreciates your careful deliberation," he said. "Sentencing will be scheduled for next month." He dismissed them, and one by one they filed out, some glancing toward Lily, others toward Frank. A few avoided looking at either of them entirely. Then the gavel struck. The trial was officially done. As the benches emptied, reporters surged toward Dana, their voices overlapping with questions about the length of the sentence she'd seek, about whether Lily would speak publicly. Dana answered only in measured phrases. were satisfied with the verdict. Justice was served for the victim, both human and animal. One reporter crouched down to Lily's height. "How does it feel, knowing the jury believed you?" Lily froze, the camera light glaring in her eyes. Carol stepped in. "She's not answering questions," she said firmly, guiding her daughter away. Frank was led from the defense table by 2 deputies. He didn't look back, not at the jury, not at the reporters, and not at Lily. But as he passed, she caught a glimpse of his profile. Hard lines, set mouth, eyes forward like a man walking into a snowstorm he couldn't avoid. And then he was gone, the door to the holding area swinging shut behind him. Outside, the late afternoon light was fading into the icy blue of winter evening. Snow coated the courthouse steps, and their boots crunched as they descended. People milled about on the sidewalk, neighbors, strangers, even a few animal rescue volunteers who had followed the trial. A woman Lily didn't know stepped forward, holding a small leash. At the other end was a golden retriever, fur thick and gleaming, tail wagging in short, careful arcs. "This is Rusty," the woman said. "We've been fostering him." Lily's breath caught. "Is he?" The woman smiled. "He's doing well now. Warm home, good food, lots of love." Rusty's eyes were bright, his movements lively. Lily knelt down, letting him sniff her hand before scratching under his chin. His tail wagged harder, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something unclench inside her. They didn't stay long in the cold. Carol guided Lily toward the car, Donna walking with them for part of the way. "You should be proud," Dana said. "Not many kids your age would have had the courage to stand up there." "I didn't feel brave," Lily admitted. "That's the thing about bravery," Dana said. "You don't have to feel it for it to be real." The drive home was quiet at first. Snow whirled in the headlights, the road winding between dark trees. Finally, Carol reached over and squeezed Lily's hand. "You changed something today," she said, "not just for Rusty, for other animals too. People will think twice." Lily leaned back in her seat, letting the hum of the tires and the rhythm of the wipers fill the space. She didn't know if she'd changed the whole world, but she'd done what she could, in the moment she had, and maybe that was enough. News of the verdict spread quickly through Fairbrook. By the next morning, the local paper carried the headline, "Man found guilty in animal cruelty case. Young witness credited for key testimony." The article described Lily simply as a minor witness, but made clear that her certainty on the stand had been pivotal. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and cookies. The animal rescue group sent a handwritten note, thanking her for being a voice when Rusty couldn't speak for himself. Weeks later, when sentencing day came, Lily didn't attend. She'd already said what she needed to say. But she heard from Dana that Frank Ellison was given jail time, a fine, and a lifetime. Ban on owning animals. Rusty was officially adopted by his foster family. Sometimes, walking home from school, Lily would pass the park and see Rusty bounding after a ball, his fur catching the sunlight like he was lit from within. She'd stop for a moment, smile, and then keep walking. On a quiet evening not long after, Lily sat at her bedroom desk, writing in her notebook. She wrote about the night she'd seen the dog in the snow, about the cold air stinging her cheeks, about the way the chain had gleamed in the porch light. She wrote about the courtroom, about Frank's stillness, about the silence when she said his name. And at the very end, she wrote, "I was afraid, but I spoke, and it mattered." She closed the notebook, set it aside, and turned off her lamp. Outside, snow was falling again, but inside, it was warm. That's how the story ended, not with applause or banners or any grand announcement, but with a girl who had seen something wrong, said what she knew, and changed the course of what would have happened otherwise. And in Fairbrook, people would. Remember for years the day the dog froze, the girl spoke, and the courtroom went silent.